For the past several years, as I've immersed myself further into Asian cinema, I would see conversations about Rurouni Kenshin pop up once in a while. Not only are these films praised for their excellent choreography, but from time to time, I would see people hail them as the greatest live-action anime adaptations of all time. In a world where anything adapts an anime or a manga gets a really bad rap nowadays, I've always been curious about that claim. Like, really? The best ever, period? Like, better than Old Boy and Lady Snowblood? Okay, technically not anime, but you get the idea. Now, I've seen tons of movies that adapt manga, and some of them, like the Lone Wolf and Cub series and Always Sunset on 3rd Street, I've been wowed by how much heart they carry, paired with the sheer artistic integrity that went into their visual style and storytelling. It's come to a point where I can argue that there are really not a lot of bad manga adaptations in comparison to the ones that are good, or at least competent. But for whatever reason, I just never got around to Rurouni Kenshin. Granted, I think trying to get through a whole series of movies is intimidating in of itself. Like, for instance, it's been over a year since I started watching the Once Upon a Time in China series, and I've only seen the first 3. But recently, I had enough free time. I was also away from my physical media backlog during that moment, and I just decided to put something on Netflix. I was tasked with putting together a dresser, because we just moved, and needless to say, I completely forgot about that dresser for several hours. Though I should probably give an introduction before I go into my experience with these films. Rurouni Kenshin, or Samurai X, is a manga series that initially ran from 1994 to 1999, then brought back in 2012 and ongoing, but currently on hiatus due to the author Nobuhiro Watsuki dealing with poor health as of this recording. I've already expressed how much I feel about that person, so less said about him the better, to be honest, but we ain't here for him. That guy can go to hell. The story followed Kenshin Himura, who was a former assassin known as the Batasai, who made a vow to no longer kill as he feels deep remorse for his victims, and started carrying what's called a backblade, which is a sword that's blunt on the front and sharp where it's facing the user. It takes place during the Meiji Restoration, where Japan was beginning to adopt more modern and Western customs, and the era of the samurai, and as a whole the shogunate, was starting to be abandoned. The manga was then adapted into 5 live-action films from 2012 to 2021, directed by Keiichi Otomo after establishing his own company and becoming the first ever Japanese film director to make a multi-picture deal with Warner Brothers. Real quick, there will be some spoilers ahead, mainly for the sake of discussing relevant plot points that play into the series, but I'll keep them at a minimum as best as possible. First up is 2012's Rurouni Kenshin, which would retroactively receive the subtitle Part 1 Origins, like Star Wars Episode 4 New Hope. The movie opens toward the end of the Battle of Toba-Fushimi, where we see Kenshin, played by Takeru Sato, leave behind his ways as a hired assassin by abandoning his sword. 10 years later, there's an investigation regarding a murder of an undercover policeman who's killed by someone using the same sword Kenshin had left behind. Obviously, he's suspected, and what follows is a web of conspiracy that leads to the sinister underbelly of Japan's criminal underworld that's tied to the empire. The movie starts off a bit slow, though granted, with any type of long-form storytelling, it's gonna take a minute to establish everyone in each place that'll be relevant. Might not fare itself too well for a 2+ hour feature film that's relatively contained, but considering how this would spawn a whole series, I can forgive it for that. Another thing too is how alive the period feels. The craftsmanship that went into the production design by So Hashimoto makes for a phenomenal setting that feels like you can just walk over and live in it. This is supplemented by Kazuhiro Sawataishi's beautiful costumes on display, as they take that anime aesthetic and retrofit it in a way where it absolutely looks like the period they would have been made in. It also kind of reminds me of a Masaki Kobayashi film, given that it's a period piece whose story relates to the cruel nature of powerful systems in which They seem negligent of human nature in favor of its personal greed and desires, like harakiri. While I have no experience with Rurouni Kenshin prior, I was fully invested in how the lead was handled, as Sato gave a performance that's sympathetic, charismatic, and stoic all at once. You really get the idea that Kenshin has been this wandering ronin whose heart happens to be in the right place for a long time. Almost like a kinder Sanjuro from Yojimbo in that sense, even to the point where Kenshin Himura isn't actually his real name like Sanjuro, but that's for another movie. Alongside Sato is Emi Takei as Kaoru, who's taken over her father's dojo after he's been murdered, and her student Yahiko, played by Takeru Tanaka. For some reason, I keep thinking they're supposed to be siblings, but I suppose that's a testament to how strong the writing for these characters really is. And before you know it, Kenshin wounds up becoming part of this familial dynamic, which then makes for some serious dramatic irony later on, which I'm not going to spoil. I truly believe it's best you see it for yourself. There's also Megumi, a physician forced to make opium, played by Yu Aoi, who escapes and joins our protagonists. I've seen Aoi in Shinya Tsukamoto's Killing, and I had no doubt that she'd pull off such a headstrong performance. Now we get to Sanosuke, played by Godzilla -1's Munetaka Aoki. Sanosuke is a brawler who challenges Kenshin at first, and then it becomes the sort of rivals turned allies situation when they're pitted against one another by one of the film's antagonists, who is an arms dealer named Kanryu, played by Teruyuki Kagawa. I adore Sanosuke's brash, hot-headed demeanor, as his eventual team up with Kenshin really got me hyped up. And of course I have to mention Hajime Saito, played by Yosuke Eguchi. He's an officer who was initially tasked to bring justice to Kenshin, but suspects Kanryu to be pulling the strings. In a way, he almost represents this sort of evolution of authority during this period in time, with how he's a highly skilled swordsman like a samurai who just happens to be a policeman. I must say, it's a very nice appeal. But I have to talk about Koji Kikawa as the villain Jine, who fully embraces Kenshin's old ways by taking up his sword as a new Batusai, and challenges his newfound ideals and morals, even getting pretty close in trying to prove Kenshin wrong. He was a very effective foil for Kenshin, as their dynamic illustrates the all-consuming nature of violence and anger, as well as how purity rooted in righteousness, even in times of turmoil and darkness, will always prevail. Lots of characters to juggle, I know, but they all have something unique to offer to the story that just makes it so engaging. You really find yourself really rooting for these characters as they breathe so much life into this narrative. And with that, I gotta talk about the action. The stunt work and fight choreography is directed by Kenji Tanigaki, who I failed to mention in my video for Twilight of the Warriors, as he was the action director for that film. And believe me when I say that the choreography in this movie is astonishing. It really takes swordplay to the next level, as the fighting isn't just limited to using blades. There's the addition of incorporating speed, martial arts, and athleticism into these techniques and sequences, and it all meshes together so gracefully that my jaw would hang because I was so stunned at how anyone managed to make something like this possible. And it's made all the better and more impactful thanks to the sweeping cinematography of Takuro Ishizaka. And lastly, I gotta mention the bombastic music by Naoki Sato. Yep, that Naoki Sato. Nowadays, you don't really see a lot of movies, let alone film franchises, that adopt a theme or have a recurring set of leitmotifs. Well, Rurouni Kenshin has you covered because, honest to God, it's one of the most iconic film soundtracks ever produced in the modern era. By the time you finish the movie, and by extension the series, you're going to be listening to Hitan on repeat. If not, it's just going to be playing in your head over and over. So yeah, first Rurouni Kenshin was really good. I personally didn't find it to be best live-action anime adaptation ever material, but I greatly enjoyed it for what it was. And then I got to part 2, and that was when I decided I'm going all in. Kyoto Inferno, released in 2014, starts with Kenshin being summoned by the government in pursuit of a deadly assassin named Shishio, who was stabbed multiple times and burned alive as a means of sudden execution, despite his efforts in helping overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate. He miraculously survives this encounter and has sworn revenge on the very nation that betrayed him. I was not expecting this movie to be such of an improvement over the first, and I loved the first movie. With the kind of premise it has, you get the impression that it's going to be another self-contained story where Kenshin has to bring justice to a ruthless killer. Well, Kyoto Inferno is not like other movies, or sequels for that matter, because before you know it, Rurouni Kenshin now becomes the sprawling epic that's nothing short of magnificent. The scope is much greater than before, and Tanagaki's choreography is even wilder, with Sato's music being more emotionally driven. All of the things that made the first movie so good are even more compelling and enthralling. I was in awe as I couldn't even fathom what I had just watched. And of course, I have to mention Tatsuya Fujiwara as Shishio. I remember Fujiwara very well as Light in Shusuke Kaneko's Death Note, and if you thought he couldn't play a better anime villain, Shishio is a fucking madman who shows no sympathy, no remorse, driven by pure, unadulterated anger. Every scene he's in has such a terrifying gravitas to it because of how much of a threat he truly is. He's so unpredictable that even trying to think of his next move had my heart beating fast. I can't even properly put into words how incredible of a movie villain he is. He is way up there with one of the best. And of course I have to mention Ryosuke Kamiyuki, another Godzilla -1 actor as Sojiro, one of Shishio's men who's just frustratingly sick, and how whenever he shows up, it's always bad news for our characters. Like, nothing good ever happens when he's on screen. Kyoto Inferno is such a perfect example of a movie whose substance really bleeds through its style. I can't say enough how much I was impressed by this one alone. As soon as it was over, I immediately wanted to watch the next. So now on to part 3, The Legend Ends. This and Kyoto Inferno were basically made as a two-parter, released about a month apart. It starts off almost right after where Kyoto Inferno ends, where Kenshin is washed up on a beach and taken in by his old master Hiko, played by Masaharu Fukuyama. Kenshin has proven to be nearly powerless against Shishio and his men, and he's desperate to learn more techniques from him. Specifically, the flash of the heaven-soaring dragon. Meanwhile, Shishio launches an attack on Tokyo with a massive warship, and it's only a matter of time before they have their legendary rematch. While Kyoto Inferno really elevated the theatrics, The Legend Ends opts for a much more character-driven narrative, which winds up strengthening the emotional weight of the story with how much the stakes have risen up to this point. Because of this, the choreography takes a bit of a back seat up until the final act, but when it comes in full swing, it's still just as gracefully unique as before, as Tanigaki really goes above and beyond in finding new ways to make it more engaging and exciting. The acting is a lot stronger here, as character arcs feel more whole, and that final battle against Shishio, where in addition to Kenshin, Sanosuke and Saito join the fray and really makes for such an expertly crafted sequence that really gets your blood pumping. All in all, a very satisfying bookend to the Kyoto arc, and as great of a finale this would have been, we still got 2 more in 2021. If you made it this far into the video, you probably like anime and manga, especially those with a lot of action. Well, Titania's Book 1, Rise of the Titans, pulls a lot from classic shonen, and nearly every chapter has a fight scene in it. I started writing Book 2, and I can guarantee there's going to be a lot more action in that one, if you're into that. So if you're interested, go ahead and get a copy today. Link in the description. The final and the beginning were made as another set of 2-parters, each taking place before and after the original trilogy. But for the sake of not only recounting my experience, but also for reasons I'll get into later, I'm gonna go out of order and talk about the beginning first. This one's set during Kenshin's time as the Batasai, as he eventually falls in love with a woman named Tomoe, played by Kazumi Arimura. This newfound relationship leaves Kenshin questioning his purpose and why he kills, and slowly begins to pursue a life of peace. The amount of twists and turns this one took, despite being a prequel, made for such a beautiful experience. In my opinion, this is the best looking of the whole series, as the story is so heavily driven by pain, grief, and redemption, and that no matter what, the sins of our past will always come for us all. The relationship between Kenshin and Tomoe felt so genuine that by the time the movie reaches a point that's spoiled by the poster, it occurred when I least expected it, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't drive me to tears. I'd also say this is where Sato's music is at its peak, as it experiments with so many different tones and instruments to coincide with a movie that balances plenty of moods already, from being ominous to melancholic, suspenseful, energetic, and just downright tragic. I also must say that when Kazuki Kitamura showed up as the film's final antagonist Tatsumi, I actually jumped in my seat. And here we are, the final. Makenyu, who some of you may know as Sonny Chiba's son, plays a Shanghai mafia leader in search for Kenshin, who's taken on a normal life with his companions after the events of Part 3. He launches these attacks to draw his attention, and it's revealed that he was the younger brother of Tomoe, Enishi. Now you see why I talked about the beginning first. Granted, the movie recounts the events of that film, but if you didn't know any better or watch the beginning prior, it feels like very vital information you missed out on, and it's like the pacing just went to a grinding halt. Thankfully, I did myself a favor and watched the beginning first, and only then did the story have a lot more layers to it, making Anishi more sympathetic as an antagonist. So now we have a man who has a score to settle with another person who's moved on from his old ways. A story of how vengeance can consume even the purest of hearts. This is also where the choreography shines the most. Tanigaki has already dealt with numerous ways to make the fights distinct. Now he's combining various styles of weapons, martial arts, and techniques, and it all comes off as being very ambitious, and he really succeeded in making it all work with such grandness. I can safely say that this is the best action I've seen in any Japanese film. And while Sato's music isn't as prominent here, its incorporation actually allows for the emotional beats of the story to really take over and have them speak for themselves. It was also nice to see everyone's story come to a satisfying close, like Karu's dojo becoming more widespread, and former villains like Sojiro finding new meaning after being inspired by Kenshin in defeat. And finally, Kenshin making peace with the demons that have haunted him. Forgiveness is the heart and soul of this series, and this movie really leaves us with questions like, how does one atone for the sins of their past after moving on, or whenever we're at our worst? And how do we handle grief and betrayal in a way where we grow as people and allow these wounds to become our greatest strengths? I firmly believe that the Rurouni Kenshin series has gotta be Japan's greatest series of action films. Not often do you get a whole set of films where each one is just so consistently great in quality. All of these films are streaming on Netflix as of this recording, and if you haven't checked them out, do yourself a favor and watch them. You will not regret it. But what do you guys think? Have y'all seen the Rurouni Kenshin films? What's your favorite action movie from Japan? Let me know in the comments, and I want to shout out my channel members and supporters on Patreon, where if you like what you see and want to get early access to videos and exclusive content, click the link below. Other than that, feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see y'all next time. Take it easy, everyone.